I'm Natalie, 19 years old. My sister's graduation day was supposed to be just another afternoon, but it turned into a scar I would carry for the rest of my life. All because of a single sentence spoken by my own parents. They said having me was a mistake. The entire auditorium burst into laughter. I sat there, lips frozen, heart clenched so tightly it felt like it might tear. And from that very moment, I knew. I would never let them forget who I am. I would make sure they remembered the name they had spent years trying to erase. But before we dive into the story, where are you watching this video from? Leave your city or country in the comments because somewhere out there, someone like me is waiting to be heard. The ceremony was held in the university's largest auditorium. High ceilings, chandeliers glowing above, rows of crimson velvet chairs lined up as if it were the final performance of a play rehearsed over 4 long years. My father wore a neatly pressed gray suit, my mother a satin ivory dress, her hair perfectly curled, a cloud of expensive perfume hanging gently in the air. Elena, my sister, wore a deep blue graduation gown, an honor cord draped across her chest, chin lifted like a queen preparing to step out before her people. As for me, I sat among the audience in a simple black dress, after being told before leaving home, "Don't look out of place. Just smile and enjoy it." I was used to being the extra. Used to sitting on the edge of family photos, used to never being asked how I felt, just expected to be quiet and look okay. When the MC invited my parents on stage to speak, I thought they would say something formal and simple, thanking the teachers, offering a few words of encouragement like most parents do on days like this, but no. The moment my mother held the microphone, she began with a familiar phrase she often used whenever guests were around. "God blessed us with an angel named Elena. Our wonderful firstborn daughter, obedient, intelligent, never once disappointing us." My father chimed in with excitement. "Honestly, we should have stopped at Elena. Who would go on to have a defective copy?" The auditorium erupted with laughter. Some people behind us clapped. Relatives in the front leaned toward one another, giggling. I heard an uncle mutter through his nose. "Still got his sense of humor, huh?" I couldn't tell if I was breathing or holding my breath. I just remember my hand on my lap clenching tight, my thumb pressing into my nail until it hurt. I looked around, hoping for just one pair of eyes, anyone to look at me with a bit of sympathy. But no one did. Not a single glance out of place. Not one frown. They were all too busy laughing at our family joke. Amid the applause and cheer, my parents continued, "And to celebrate this amazing achievement, we'd like to give Elena a little gift, the Tesla she's always dreamed of." Elena lifted her hand to her mouth, pretending to be surprised. The auditorium roared again. I saw my mother wrap her arms around her. My father pulled the car keys from the inner pocket of his suit and held them up like a trophy. And I was still sitting there. No one looked my way. No one asked how I felt. I wasn't even sure if they remembered I was also their daughter. Also part of the same family they had just turned into a comedy sketch. But I remembered. And I will not forget. Because that was the moment I began rewriting my role in this play. I would no longer be the extra. Never again. I wasn't surprised by how I was treated at that graduation. In truth, the feeling of being pushed to the margins, treated like the leftover of the family, it had been simmering for as long as I could remember. I still recall when I turned 8, my birthday landed on a weekend, and I woke up excited, wearing a rose-colored dress I had saved all year for that one special day. But my parents were gone. They left a note on the kitchen table saying they had to take Elena to the city's gifted student competition. No cake, no wishes, not even a message. I sat there alone, spooning cold cereal into my mouth, eyes fixed on the photo of Elena hanging in the center of the living room, the one where she was honored by her whole school in 5th grade, wearing a bright red sash and a smile that made everyone say, "That girl's going places." There was a time I got a 9 in math, an incredibly hard thing for me, and I brought the paper home, holding on to a fragile hope. My father glanced at it and nodded. Good, then turned back to the television screen. My mother didn't even ask how hard I had tried. but whenever Elena got a 10, it was like a festival. My parents would call my aunt, print out the test and tape it to the fridge, retell the story over every meal. Every beautiful thing, the compliments, the proud glances, the random gifts for no reason at all belonged to Elena. I wasn't jealous, I just felt invisible. And I had tried to change. I started taking more careful notes, staying up late to improve my grades. I trained myself to speak less, ask fewer questions, never interrupt. I even mimicked the way Elena sat with her arms folded, how she greeted adults with perfect manners, how she slowly nodded when listening, all in the hope that, just once, my father would say, "I'm proud of you," or that my mother would hug me for no reason. But that moment never came. My efforts slipped away like sand through my fingers. The more I tried to become like Elena, the more I was reminded that I wasn't her. My mother said, "Don't try to be someone else. But at least don't be a bother." It sounded gentle, but there was always an unspoken message in every word they said. That I, in my very being, was already a burden. I was labeled the difficult one from a young age. Every time I asked why, too many times, my father would shake his head. Girls shouldn't argue over everything. If I cried when being scolded, my mother would sigh, "There you go, being sensitive again." Meanwhile, Elena, quiet and composed, was called a young lady beyond her years, the pride of the family. She could sit and read all afternoon without disturbing anyone. And me? I just wanted to be heard, to be acknowledged as someone who also had feelings. But to them, those feelings were always just inconvenient. Little by little, I began to believe I truly was a broken copy. Not quiet enough to be loved, not smart enough to be recognized. Just different enough to be reminded every day that I wasn't supposed to exist. And so I grew up in a house where every wall bore my sister's name, and I was just someone passing through, leaving no trace. But what they didn't know was this. Those invisible wounds were slowly shaping a person they would no longer be able to ignore. I waited until the ceremony ended, until the crowd spilled out of the auditorium to take pictures, hug, laugh, accept flowers, sign graduation caps, and promise to keep in touch. I walked toward where my parents stood with Elena, still holding the massive bouquet given by a relative. My mother was busy showing off the car gift to a distant aunt. My father was laughing as he repeated his earlier joke to an old friend, still finding it as amusing as if it were the highlight of his life. I stepped closer, standing there in silence for a few seconds before I spoke. My throat was dry, but I forced myself to say it. "Mom, Dad, did you realize what you said on stage, how it made me feel?" They stopped, turned to look at me. Their eyes held no confusion, no remorse. Just a tired, cold gaze, as if I were ruining the cheerful mood they had worked so hard to build. My father frowned, his tone calm and detached, like when he corrected my math mistakes. "You're overreacting. It was just a joke. Don't turn everything into a tragedy." I felt my feet sinking into the tiled floor. I tried to stay calm. "But I was standing right there," I said. I heard every word. The entire auditorium did. No one truly laughed, because that wasn't something to laugh about. My mother sighed and folded her arms across her chest. "You're being sensitive again. Your father was just joking." Everyone laughed. "Why do you always have to make things so dramatic?" I wanted to scream that I wasn't always being dramatic. I wanted to ask them if they had ever truly seen me as a human being, but my throat closed up. And just as I was struggling to find another word to bring them back to reality, Elena stepped in. She gently placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes full of kindness and a cruel kind of innocence. "Sweetheart," she said, "have you ever considered that maybe you're just a little too sensitive? I think, if you tried to be more like me, maybe Mom and Dad would be prouder. I don't think they ever meant to hurt you." I stood still. Every word she said felt like tiny shards of glass, slicing through me without leaving a drop of blood. It wasn't malice, it was blindness. I didn't need Elena to defend me from our parents. I just wanted her, the one person who grew up under the same roof, eating the same meals, hearing the same echoes to understand even a fraction of what it was like to be constantly overlooked. But she didn't. Even she didn't see, didn't understand, didn't believe I was in pain. To her, I was just the difficult sister, the one who complained too much and always saw herself as the victim. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just alone in how I felt. I was alone in my own bloodline. They didn't see me, they didn't hear me, and they never would. So I turned and walked away without saying another word. There was no need. It wasn't worth it. And for the first time in my life, I saw my path clearly, a path without them. Without the condescending smiles, without the jokes that crushed belief. Without the pitying glances. Just me, and the truth. And from that truth, I would rebuild myself. Even if they never noticed. I didn't cry as I walked out of that auditorium. Not a single tear. The sun was still blazing above the schoolyard, the trees swayed gently in the breeze as if nothing had happened. I walked quietly to the car, opened the door, sat down, and gripped the steering wheel for several long minutes, empty inside. No one came after me. No one asked where I was going. They were still busy taking pictures with Elena beside her brand new car, wrapped in a bright red ribbon. Their entire world, neatly packaged in her success and the spotlight shining on her, and I was just a shadow. Extra. That night, I didn't go home. I found the cheapest room to rent in the city, somewhere the noise of traffic could drown out my thoughts. I didn't leave a note, didn't send a message, didn't make a single call. I knew that if I stayed, if I tried to explain, tried to make them see, I would get pulled back into the same cycle of excuses and distant looks from the very people who called themselves family. I was exhausted from trying to be seen. All I wanted now was to find myself. I applied for scholarships on my own. Step by step. I wrote my own essays, filled out forms by myself, spent hours researching universities that offered the programs I needed. I had no one to ask for advice, no one to help me craft a perfect resume. But in that silence, I began to hear my own voice, a voice that had never been allowed to speak inside that old house. I got a job at a small cafe to cover rent, food, and transportation. At first, I didn't know how to carry a tray, got scolded for making the wrong drinks. My feet ached after 8-hour shifts. But no one there called me a mistake. No one told me to be quiet or pretend to be gentle. I was just another person tired, clumsy, but with a chance to learn, to fix things, to grow little by little. The day I received the email announcing that I had been awarded a full-ride scholarship from a prestigious university in another state, I opened it dozens of times, just to make sure it wasn't some cruel joke. The email included congratulations from the admissions board, along with praise for my essay where I had written about growing up in a family where silence could quietly kill one's sense of self-worth. I had written the truth, without embellishment. And for the first time, someone read it and validated it. I printed that email and taped it to the wall of my rented room. It was the first certificate I had ever awarded myself, not to please anyone, not to prove anything, but because I hadn't given up when giving up would have been the easiest thing to do. I moved to a new state, a new dorm, a new life. At first, I felt lost among hundreds of unfamiliar faces. But then I became friends with a girl named Riley, who always asked what I thought after each philosophy class, who didn't laugh when I told her I had never celebrated my own birthday. I met a professor who supervised my thesis, someone who read every word I wrote with care and once asked me, "Do you realize you have a really profound way of seeing things?" I almost didn't know how to respond, because I had never believed anyone cared about the way I saw anything. Slowly, I began to realize I was not some extra piece the world didn't need. I wasn't a broken copy. I was no longer Elena's little sister. No longer the forgotten girl at the end of the table. I was me with thoughts of my own, feelings of my own, and dreams of my own. And for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Truly seen. Not through the lens of comparison, not needing to shrink myself to fit someone else's mold. In this new city, surrounded by people who had never met my family, I was no longer a mistake. I was a beginning. And from here, I would write my own story with the same hands no one had ever held, but that had always held on anyway. I was sitting in the library one late autumn afternoon, golden leaves swirling outside the window, sunlight resting softly across the table like a gentle dusting of light. I was revising my final essay when a notification popped up on my phone. The sender's email address was my mother's, someone I had completely cut contact with over a year ago. The subject line contained just 3 words. About Elena. My heart froze in my chest. I hesitated for several minutes before tapping the screen. The message was brief, but each word was as cold as a formal report. My mother said that Elena was facing a serious problem. She had lost her job months ago, spent all her savings, and had recently confessed to the family that she was addicted to drugs. Heroin, my mother wrote, as if she were documenting a word she couldn't bear to speak aloud. They discovered it after she began acting erratically, money started going missing, and once she was found unconscious in the bathroom. My mother said they didn't know what to do, and so they had decided to write to me. I sat frozen for a long time, the screen still glowing in my hand, my mind completely blank. Not because I didn't grasp how serious the situation was, but because I didn't know how to respond to the fact that, after all those years of silence, denial, and dismissal, my parents chose to return to my life through a lifeless email. No greeting, no apology, no acknowledgement, just, "Your sister's an addict. We need to talk." But that wasn't even the worst part. At the end of the email, my father had added a separate line, almost like a postscript. "You didn't have anything to do with this, did you? Wasn't there a time you took your sister to hang out with some strange kids? You weren't the one who got her into all this, were you?" I read that line over and over again. My heart no longer beat fast from fear but from fury. After all the years they treated me as a shadow, a burden, the sensitive one, now, with their golden child falling apart, their first instinct was to suspect me. Not because I was the closest one to her, but because, deep in their minds, I had always been the problem. The troublemaker. The one who might ruin everything. I sat alone in the corner of the library, surrounded by hundreds of students typing and studying. Yet, I felt like I'd been thrown right back into that old house, the place where every word I spoke was twisted into rebellion, where every pain I expressed was dismissed as exaggeration. They hadn't called me when I left home alone. They hadn't asked whether I was safe, or how I'd survived, or what I had done to stand back up after everything. But now, when their perfect daughter had fallen, they came back not to find me, but to find someone to blame. I turned off my phone screen, set it down on the table. Outside the window, leaves were falling in slow waves, like old dreams drifting away. I knew I had to answer them, but not to ease their fear. I had to remind them no one can live forever inside the illusion of a perfect child, and no one should be expected to carry someone else's shame forever. Not anymore, not me. It took me 3 days to decide whether to respond. Not because I was uncertain about how I felt, but because I needed to choose my words carefully, clearly, and firmly, words that couldn't be twisted into guilt, not this time. After typing and deleting draft after draft, I decided not to respond by email. I made one phone call. Just one. On a Saturday afternoon, when I knew both of them would be home. My mother answered. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd just finished crying, but the moment she realized it was me, her tone shifted instantly to delight. "Oh, thank God, you finally called back. I knew you wouldn't abandon your sister." No asking how I was. Not a single "how have you been?" She jumped straight to the main subject, as if I'd only been gone a week. Then my father joined the call, his tone firm, like he was chairing a formal meeting. They summarized the situation. Elena had completely collapsed. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, moved like a shell of a person. As for the addiction, they barely mentioned it, referring to it with phrases like a minor issue or a difficult phase. I listened without interrupting until my mother said something that made my whole body go cold. "If people find out about this, what will happen to our family? We can't let this get out." That's why I think maybe you could come home for a while, take care of your sister. But don't tell anyone about what's going on, okay? If we keep this quiet, everything will be fine." I froze for a moment. I had to tilt my head toward the ceiling just to keep the tears from spilling out in fury. I thought maybe, just maybe, I would hear some remorse, some desperate plea born out of love for Elena. But no. Their first concern wasn't their daughter's health, it was appearances. The way relatives might look at them, the family's reputation, maintaining the fake image they had crafted for years. A model family with 2 daughters, one perfect, the other silent. I took a deep breath. My voice didn't tremble like it once did. I spoke slowly, each word slicing through the illusion they were clinging to. Elena doesn't need someone to take care of her. She needs treatment. She needs doctors, therapists. She needs to be admitted into a real rehab center, not locked away at home while everyone pretends nothing's happening. I won. I heard my father's angry voice on the other end, as if I had insulted the family's honor. Absolutely not. Are you insane? You want people to know about this? You want the neighbors to gossip, the company to whisper, your grandparents to feel ashamed of their failed grandchild. My mother began to cry again, her voice broken and trembling, like she was down to her final plea. "Please, sweetheart, I'm begging you. Elena is a good girl. She just made a mistake. I know you're angry at us. But how can you just stand by and do nothing when your sister is suffering?" I closed my eyes, steadying myself, then replied, voice like steel. "I've done so much for this family already, but it was never enough because you never saw me as someone who mattered. Today, I won't repeat that same mistake. If you can't find the courage to face the truth, then don't expect anything from me. And if your only goal is to hide Elena's pain just to protect your reputation, then you are the ones destroying her, not me." The line went silent. Then my father spoke, cold and sharp. "Fine, we'll handle it ourselves." And he hung up. No goodbye, no apology. I set the phone down, my heart heavy but no longer trembling. I didn't feel victorious, I only saw the truth more clearly than ever before. The mask had fallen. And behind the polished paint of a picture-perfect family were people willing to sacrifice their own daughter just to preserve a facade that no longer existed. But I didn't belong to that world anymore. No longer bound by fear or the guilt of not being like Elena. I was myself, and this time I chose the truth not because it was pleasant, but because it was freeing. I hesitated for 2 full days before calling Elena. Not because I was angry with her, but because I was afraid I wouldn't recognize the voice that had once been so familiar. Afraid that after everything, all that would be left between us were silences too wide and too deep to cross. But eventually, I pressed the call button. And when I heard her voice on the other end, hoarse, frail, trembling like a candle on the verge of going out, I could barely believe it was her. The sister who had once seemed so strong, so untouchable, so unbreakable to the world. We were quiet for a long moment. Then I spoke first, simply, "It's me." She exhaled, as if releasing a weight she'd been carrying forever. "Are you okay?" A question no one in our family had ever asked me. I didn't answer directly. I just asked, "What happened, Elena?" And then the truth began to fall, piece by piece, cracking open the shell of perfection our parents had forced her into for years. Elena spoke slowly, pausing often to suppress the emotions she had clearly buried for far too long. She said it started in college, when our parents would call constantly, demanding she stay at the top of her class, keep her scholarship, make the whole family proud of having a daughter like her. Even when she was sick, they wouldn't let her rest. Dad used to say, "Being tired is just part of winning." After graduating, she got a good job at a major law firm. It should have gotten easier, but the pressure only grew. Every late report, every tiny error in a document, made her feel like she was about to destroy the image she had spent her whole life building. No one saw the panic from the outside. But inside, she felt like she was walking a tightrope, terrified of falling. There was no space for mistakes. No one to lean on. "Every time I thought about failing," she whispered, I just wanted to disappear. Then a colleague offered her a sedative. Just to help you sleep, they said. At first, it was just one pill on the weekend, then two, then something stronger, something that erased more, soothed more. Heroin entered her life, like a quiet escape. It wasn't that I liked the feeling, she said softly, but it was the only time I didn't have to be anyone. No pressure to succeed, no perfection to uphold, no role model to live up to. Just a regular person, allowed to be weak. But every escape comes with a cost. By the time she realized she had lost her job, lost control, it was already too late. And when our parents found out, they didn't ask her why. They only asked how to hide it. I sat in silence, each of her words like tiny needles pressing into my chest. Not out of anger, but pain. Pain for her and pain for myself. I had always thought Elena was the loved one, the favored one, the one wrapped in admiration like a jewel. But I never realized that the golden cage I had envied was a prison. I had been abandoned, she had been confined. I was ignored, she was controlled. We both grew up in the same house, but we were each victims in our own way. I lived in a silence forced upon me. She lived in a spotlight she never asked for. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but every word felt too small next to the wound I heard in her voice. So I simply said, I just wish you'd told me sooner, I would have been there. Elena didn't answer right away. After a moment, she whispered, I was scared. Scared Mom and Dad would hate me. Scared you'd look down on me, but now, you still called, you're still listening. You didn't turn away. I swallowed hard, then replied, because I understand, and for the first time, I'm not standing on the outside anymore. I'm here. With you. In that moment, I knew maybe I couldn't save Elena overnight, but at the very least, we had broken the wall of silence. At least once in our lives, we truly saw each other not through masks, not through someone else's lens, but just as two girls, each hurt in different ways. Now learning to forgive themselves and to see one another with the tenderness our family never gave us. That night, I sat in my small room, the laptop screen glowing softly under the warm yellow light. Outside, the city moved on with its quiet, humming traffic. On the table was a cup of tea gone cold, and inside me was a stillness that no longer hurt, just clarity. For the first time in years, I didn't feel swept away by other people's emotions. I was no longer the quiet girl who accepted the unacceptable. I was fully myself, and I knew exactly what I needed to say. I opened my inbox, typed in my parents' email, still saved in my contacts like a wound not fully healed. The subject line was simple. About Elena, and about me. I didn't begin with a greeting, I began with the truth. I don't hate you. I used to, but not anymore. Anger was the only thing that kept me alive in the house you created. But now, I see things more clearly, and because I see clearly, I can't go back. I can't pretend the hurt didn't happen, or that the comparisons, the humiliations disguised as jokes, were just nothing. I can't return to playing the side character in a family script built on performance and fear of being seen for who we really are. I'll help Elena if she truly wants help. Not to protect your reputation, not to keep a decayed image intact, but because she deserves a chance to live her life for real. But if you still believe silence will save this family, then I respectfully step away. One last time. I read the email 3 times before I hit send. No trembling, no hesitation. Just a feeling of lightness, like I had finally set down a backpack I'd carried far too long. Right after, I messaged Elena. I sent her a link to a trusted recovery center, a place with doctors, therapists, and no masks. I had already called, asked questions, and held a spot. All she had to do was say yes. I wasn't forcing her. I was simply opening a door. The last message I sent wasn't long. But it was everything I had wanted to say from the beginning. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real. Then I turned off my phone. No expectations, no fear. I only knew that whatever happened tomorrow, I had taken a step toward the light. A step made of compassion and freedom. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again this time, with no one else writing the script for me. There are wounds that don't bleed. No one sees them. No one hears them. No one touches them or calls them by name. But they quietly corrode us from the inside like small waves crashing day after day against the foundation, until one day, the whole childhood collapses, and no one understands why. So many of us grow up under the weight of expectations, comparisons, and words that seemed harmless, but suffocated our real emotions. And so, we learn to be silent, learn to be well-behaved, learn to hide who we truly are just to survive. But you know what? You don't have to wait until someone calls you a mistake to realize this. You have the right to rewrite your story. The right to choose a life not built on someone else's gaze. The right to walk off a stage you never asked to be cast on and step into the light, just as you are. Not perfect, just real. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. Now, it's your turn. Have you ever been compared to your siblings? What's your story? Have you ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or hurt in a way no one ever noticed? Share it in the comments. Not to be judged, but to heal. To remind each other that we are not alone in the pain we thought was silent. And if this video touched something deep within your heart, tap like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a gentle reminder.